What do the XDiavel and the XDiavel have in common? According to Ducati, aside from 6 letters in their names, only brake calipers and tires. So, despite the similarities of the names, and even in profile, Ducati calls the 2016 XDiavel the company's first true cruiser. Don't think of this as a boardroom construction meant to fill in a particular check mark on a manufacturer's list of necessary products. As Claudio Domenicali, the Ducati Motor Holdings SPA chief executive officer, said just this morning over breakfast, Ducati doesn't focus group its bikes to death. Instead, the company builds the bikes it wants, the bikes that scratch a creative itch, and lets the chips fall where they may. The XDiavel is a perfect example of the Ducati design approach. First, the designers decided what constitutes a cruiser as seen through its research of the American market. Next, the designers processed the information through the filter of Ducati styling, technology and performance to settle on what the key features would be. In the case of the XDiavel, the cruiser traits are relaxed, low-speed riding, the call of travel, and a feet-forward riding position. On the Ducati half of the DNA, signature Italian style crafted with the latest engineering and delivering a hefty dose of performance. This folding together of the somewhat contradictory design goals is what puts the X in XDiavel. While the engine is always important in a motorcycle, in cruisers it is the crown jewel, the centerpiece of the bike's design while simultaneously being the heart of its functionality. The Ducati Testastretta DVT 1262 takes this to the extreme, in a most positive way. With the Multistrada 1200 engine as its starting point, Ducati's engineers massaged and reshaped the L-twin to a form more appropriate for Ducati-style cruiser duty. The 1262cc displacement comes courtesy of a longer stroke, yielding bore and stroke dimensions of 106.0 mm by 71.5 mm. The DVT moniker in the name stands for Desmodromic Variable Timing, which first appeared in the Multistrada 1200 last year, where it varies the timing of both the intake and exhaust camshafts independently, allowing the engine to deliver the seemingly impossible bottom-end grunt and top-end oomph. Cruiser riders don't normally spin their bike's engine up to the RPM limit. Instead, they usually rely on the bottom-end torque as the primary motivating factor. Ducati have clearly studied this phenomena and have moved to address this with the XDiavel. The result is a claimed torque peak of 95 pounds-to-foot at 5,000 revolutions per minute. While that RPM level may be a bit high for traditional cruisers, in fact, on many cruisers, that would be approaching the rev ceiling, the peak is significantly lower than on the previous XDiavel and then remains relatively flat until 7,500 revolutions per minute. However, what cruiser riders typically have not experienced is the soul-stirring, deep intake howl emitted as the Testastratta's superbike roots come online, thrusting the XDiavel forward with such force that they'll be thankful for the bolster at the back of the seat, since the feet and hands forward riding position gives the rider very little with which to combat the acceleration other than upper body strength. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Spy shots, Ducati XDiavel gets a makeover. Compression was bumped from 12.5 to 1 on the MTS to a healthy 13 to 1 on the XDiavel. While the Bosch electronic injection system utilizes the same 56 mm elliptical throttle bodies, the ride-by-wire, RBW, has, not surprisingly, been completely reworked. Ducati being Ducati, the engine also has a host of electronic goodies to provide the rider with a variety of power delivery options. The 3 riding modes are Sport, Touring, and Urban, each of which also features distinct Ducati traction control, DTC, and ABS settings. From a power delivery perspective, the Sport mode naturally brings all 156 horses into play with the relationship between the right grip and the throttle's butterflies a 1-to-1 ratio, giving the most direct relationship with the rider. The DTC is also set to its least intrusive preset level. In Touring mode, the whole stable is still available, But at lower RPM the throttle response is softened by lessening the ratio of wrist input to throttle opening. However, as the rider opens the throttle further, the ratio changes to the point that, in the widest portions of throttle opening, it ultimately returns to the 1:1 ratio of sport mode. Urban mode drops power output to 100 horsepower and further softens the throttle inputs to civilize the savage in the confines of the city, and presumably slippery conditions. DTC gets progressively more assertive with touring and urban modes. Here's where regular readers, who are familiar with my penchant for smooth throttle response, may be in for a surprise. In my quest for bobble-free on-off-on throttle transitions on the street, I am often willing to sacrifice a bit of power on the altar of smoothness. Frequently, I feel that RBW Sport mode is shorthand for abrupt mode, and normal is actually the most streetable setting. Well, the XDiavel lays that belief to rest. I began my day in San Diego's morning traffic in urban mode and found it to be friendly. Once the ride breached the city limits, touring offered plenty of power with no feeling of disconnection between the grip and the rear wheel. I was content to ride like this for quite a while. However, when I switched to sport, I was amazed at how smooth throttle transitions were. Deliberately shifting from acceleration to neutral throttle to acceleration to deceleration and back on the gas, mid-corner, we're greeted with buttery smooth power modulation with nary a hint of abruptness. The XDiavel stayed in sport for the remainder of the day, with the only exception being quick trips into the other modes to check their performance when we encountered different riding situations. While we're on the topic of power, let's take a moment to consider the XDiavel's output. While Ducati's reps made much of the increase in torque in the bottom end of the RPM range when compared to the old Diavel, and it was there, the XD still doesn't clear its throat until the tach clears 3,500 revolutions per minute. Below that, the engine will accelerate, but it also shudders as the cylinders try to deliver thrust from each power stroke. Above 4,000 revolutions per minute, it's ready to rock. The Testastreta's Superbike power plant gives riders the luxury of choosing two riding techniques. One can loaf along in a single gear rolling between 4,000 and 6,500 revolutions per minute, content to use the engine as a giant rheostat, or if you're in the mood for some shenanigans, drop down a gear or two and let the L-twin pleasure you orally. However, the real joy of the XD comes from turning the loud tap to 11 and holding on for dear life.